Hello, how's everybody doing out there? Cousin Johnny here, bringing you another show. I am really excited about this show and this guest. Now, we all have an obsession. I don't care how old you are, young, old, whatever, with something an iconic thing that happened here in Monterey and iconic in rock and roll history, the Monterey Pop Festival. So I'm proud to say that I'm bringing on one today for our show, one of the photographers, a local man, one of the photographers for the Monterey Pop. I would just like to say that we did the show. We did Monterey Pop 1. This is Monterey Pop 2, second show, about a year ago. And there was another gentleman by the name of Fred Arellano. And he was another local gentleman that he also shot Monterey Pop. Unfortunately, we lost Fred a little while ago, and Fred was really so proud to be shooting Monterey Pop, and so happy to know that we were going to get together. So my guest is going to be Tom O'Neal, primo photographer, and myself. We would like to dedicate this show today for Fred Arellano. Fred, we love you. So please welcome Tom O'Neal. Tom, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Johnny. I'm doing great. Nice
Good.
introduction about Fred too.
We're going to dedicate this show to him. When I told him that we were going to do Monterey Pop 2, which we did the one about a year ago, a little longer. He was so excited about it. He was like, "Yeah, give Tom a call. Give Tom a call. Let's do it." So we're gonna honor Fred today with this show. So, Tom, what an event that you were involved in. I mean, the most iconic of music event probably in the world. I mean, for it in its caliber, it was the best.
Close. Yeah, it's pretty significant.
So, Tom, I know I talked to you about this before, but let's refresh everybody's memories. And so, how did you get involved by shooting the pop festival? Were you a photographer? I mean, how did it go? How did you get hired to do it?
Well, I just basically gotten out of art school. I was a design and painting major, and I took a semester of photography, and I kind of got hooked on it. So when I got out of school, I was kind of trying to figure out what I was really going to do, and I ended up in Carmel because I was living in Big Sur at the time. I walked into a record store and I picked up an album, and it said the Mamas and Papas Deliver, and it was a very animated cover where they're drinking water out of a hat that had 4 holes in it.
Oh, perfect.
And the picture had so much life to it and everything, and because of my design background and I was fresh to do something of this nature, it just clicked, and I said, that's it. This is what I'm going to do. I want to take pictures for album covers. I want to be a rock and roll photographer. I literally had this kind of epiphany moment. And just a few weeks after that, there was an article in the Monterey Herald talking about this Monterey International Pop Festival that was coming to the fairgrounds in June. And I thought, hey, this could be a great opportunity for me because I didn't know any rock bands. I didn't know anybody in the music business.
Yeah.
So I thought, I might be able to make some connections. So through a very close friend of mine, I told her about this. She said, if you go to the Pop Festival and if you get pictures of David Crosby, I will make sure that his manager down in LA will see the pictures. So I was able to get some passes through Lou Adler, and he wanted photographers there because he wanted the exposure of the Pop Festival. And I did get pictures of Crosby and the Byrds, and I got the shots. I gave them my friend. She sent them down to LA, and the next thing I know, I got a phone call, and that's basically it started. I went down there, and he liked my work. He gave me some assignments. I met Crosby and the rest of the band right after that. And I even started doing an album cover for them. And just one thing led to another. And
that's really great.
So that's how I didn't just go to school and study how to be a rock and roll photographer. I kind of fell into it.
That's great.
But it was Monterey. It was Monterey that was the catapult.
That's it. Yeah. Now, when I had a conversation with Fred, I'll just tell everybody kind of what I remember what Fred said. And Fred went to Monterey High School. I went to Monterey High School. And Fred was taking photography at Monterey. And so he always had a little camera with him. I think he said it was his mom's camera, but he always had a camera with him. And like you said, they were advertising Monterey Pop Festival. We need volunteers. We need help. So Fred, being a high school kid, just said, you know something, maybe I could go there and move a couple chairs around and move a couple tables around and maybe take some photos, not thinking anything of it. So he goes to the day, and they're all the volunteers are getting their jobs, and some guy pulls up, and I don't know who it was. You might know, but the guy pulls up and he goes, "Can you tell me where the Monterey airport is?" And
let me interject in there.
Go ahead.
It was Jan Wenner from Rolling Stone magazine.
Okay, got it.
Rather significant, and he hadn't launched the magazine yet, so people really didn't know who he was. So here's this guy who's going to turn out to be a very big influence in the world, and he stumbles across Fred, and Fred ends up taking him out to the airport. Yeah, go ahead.
And then I guess after that, and then he says Lou Adler and John Phillips come walking out of this plane, and he had his mom's camera. He takes a couple photos, and that's really a classic photo of those two walking off the plane.
Here's the picture he got of them.
Oh right yeah, wow, that's really great. That's really great.
He has, it might be here in the book somewhere, but it's a pretty well-known shot. He got a photo. He had the wherewithal, even at this young age, he had the wherewithal to get a shot of these guys deplaning. And so this Learjet pulls up, and then you could walk right out onto the tarmac. It was real different.
Yeah.
And they're getting out, and then he comes up to them and he says, "Hey, can I take a picture?" And that's what he got. But if you want to notice, if you see how they're dressed, these are very, very rich hippies. I don't think one could really call them hippie, but they were definitely part of the hip generation. And the other thing I have to point out is John Phillips is 6'6", 6'7", I think. And then he wears a hat that's another 5 inches.
Oh yeah.
So he's like 6'14", something like that,
Now so I guess after that they were so happy that Fred showed them where the airport was. They gave Fred a pass for the whole show.
No, that's how he got his passes. And
that's how that happened.
Yeah. So we all have certain ways that we got in there, and I got mine by approaching Lou Adler when he was going into with John Phillips going into the police department to talk to the mayor and to the chief of police about the event. Yeah. And I waited outside and I gave him a photograph to look at, and he liked it, and he said, "Come on in," So all of a sudden, beautiful. I'm standing next to Michelle while they're going at it with the chief of police and the mayor, which was. Beautiful. That wasn't a walk in the park. That was a little heated. The mayor of Monterey, this woman, Minnie Doyle.
Yeah, Minnie Coyle. Yeah.
Minnie Coyle. She was something else. She for some reason thought that the hippies and the Hells Angels were exactly the same thing. Yeah. So she thought Monterey Pop was going to be Armageddon. That there were going to be riots in the streets. Yeah. And burning cars and setting trash cans on fire. Yeah,
she was worried.
Yeah, and so she had as many police officers that she could get, sheriff, Monterey PD, Seaside, all that. Quite a few of them in full riot gear, helmets, shields, all that kind of stuff. And there was a picture that Elaine Mays took, one of the photographers then, fantastic photographer. She got a shot of one of the cops making a daisy chain out of little flowers and holding it up. And you can see his helmet and his gear and his big leather jacket, and he's smiling. And basically, those guys said they thought that there was more violence at a PTA meeting than at the Monterey Pop.
It was nothing but just beautiful.
It was a beautiful event. And it was advertised and promoted as 3 days of music, love, and flowers. And that's what it was.
As really. Eric Burden would say on his song, even the cops grooved with us.
Oh, yeah. No, they were into it. It was one of these just magical events. And, you know, they've tried to redo it and replicate it. It's just never happened. Even at the 50th anniversary, Lou Adler spent some money on that with the bands. But, you know, first of all, people have asked, well, why don't they just continue it? Well, the fairgrounds legally can only hold 14,000 people.
Yeah.
And with today's bands, there's no way that small amount of people could support the fees.
Yeah.
What these groups get. So it's never going to happen. But they tried, certainly for the 50th, and it was a good try. It was a good try. It wasn't it, but it was a good try.
Now, Tom, did Lou Adler and John Phillips, did they mastermind this festival? I mean, was there a committee, or how do you think it happened?
Well, I know how it happened. And Lou has told me this. So, you know, we have since become friends, because when the 50th anniversary in 2017 happened, Monterey kind of made me the spokesperson, the Convention and Visitor Center. And there were a number of meetings with Lou Adler. He would come up from LA, and we knew each other because after the Pop Festival, you know, I mentioned going down to LA. I built a whole career doing album covers, and so I saw Lou Adler periodically, and I did an album with him for John Phillips when the Mamas and Papas kind of splintered off, and John Phillips made his first album. I did the cover, and so it was whoops, you really can't. It's too shiny, but it's called Wolfgang Ballet. And something I really like on the back here, I usually put my name as a credit down at the bottom, and it's kind of hard to see there. But Lou looked at it, and my name stood out more than his, so he said, "Will you change that?"
Oh yeah.
He says, "You put your name a little bit above mine, and I want mine at the bottom."
Yeah.
Because you'd see it more, and I don't blame him. He's the producer.
He's the guy. Yeah.
You know, I'm just the photog. But I got some good shots. It turned out to be a very successful album. It's very iconic in his hat. And this album, a few years later, inspired the Desire album that Bob Dylan did. They're in both album covers. They're wearing hats and a scarf and looking out,
right,
and all that. So I was quite proud of that. But anyway, getting back to basically how this whole thing happened.
Yeah.
They were John Phillips and Michelle and Cass Elliot and Paul McCartney were having dinner at Cass Elliot's house down in LA.
Yeah.
In the spring of 1967. And it was just a casual dinner. And in conversation, it came up, particularly, I think McCartney said, you know, what bothers me is that the Beatles' music is so well known, but really, he says, I don't want it to be remembered as a bunch of screaming girls. It really wasn't that music. It was much more. And he said, I would like the music to be remembered more as an art form, like jazz or even classical. And he says, but it's a conundrum because, you know, how is that really going to happen? It just so happened that John Phillips and Lou had been having the same conversation. They wanted to get gentrification, much more credibility to rock and roll, because at that time, rock and roll music was really not considered popular music. It was more rock, and it had a pretty negative, non-credible perception by a lot of people. And there were a number of kids that I've talked to now as adults that were maybe 15, 14, 15, 13, and they wanted to go, but their parents wouldn't let them go to this awful event because it was about that horrible rock and roll music. And those people are terrible, and they're a bad influence. So Phillips, John and Lou, they knew their music kind of fell into this. And so they wanted to elevate the credibility and the perception and also make it something that would be perceived as an art form. So they're trying to figure out how this can happen. They need a venue and they need something where they can get a lot of the bands together and promote it in a very, very classy way. Now, here's where the serendipity happened. Several months before this spring dinner, in 1966, actually in September, there was a guy named Alan Parisier, and he was at the Jazz Festival, the Monterey Jazz Festival.
Okay.
And he's sitting there with a friend of his that would do jazz concerts. And Alan Parisier gets this idea that, this is pretty cool. He's looking around. He says, we could do something like this only with rock and roll.
Yeah, perfect.
And the guy, I can't remember his name, this partner of his, but they said, yeah. So Alan Parisier was able to he borrowed $10,000 from his mother, and he put down and reserved the 3 days in June, 16th, 17th, and 18th for the following year in 1967.
Beautiful, yeah.
And right after this wonderful dinner where this realization had come about, very, very shortly after that, Alan Parisier approached Lou Adler and John Phillips because he wanted the Mamas and Papas to be the headline act at this 3-day event that they were going to put on. They didn't have a name for it or anything, but they were trying to get people, signed up and everything. So Phillips and Adler, Lou and John, they just said, "Oh, we've been waiting for you." So they immediately made a partnership, and eventually they bought Alan Parisier out so they could actually own the event. And Alan Parisier stayed on as a producer. Nice guy. He's since passed away, but so he was still involved. But it was just basically these ideas that were happening, and they gelled. So they chose Monterey because Alan Parisier already had it booked, and they took the format, the same 3-day format of the Jazz Festival.
The jazz, yeah.
So the Monterey Jazz Festival had a huge influence on all the rock concerts that would go on. This was the first one of 3 days of organized music to be presented and to happen anywhere in the world. And right after this, it just spawned. It spawned rock festivals all over the world. Woodstock came 2 years later, and there were festivals in Australia and Germany and France and Belgium. All over the United States, but it all started right here in Monterey. And I think that's really one of the significant things, that Monterey will always be able to say, this is where it all started.
This is where it all started.
So not a lot of people know how it actually, came about. Now, the other interesting thing about this, it's pretty hard to believe, from that dinner in the spring, 7 weeks later, 7 weeks later, the first act came on stage at Monterey.
7 weeks.
7 weeks. 7 weeks. No internet, no fax machines, no cell phones, no nothing except
nothing.
Landlines. They weren't even called landlines then, just the telephone, telegrams, and that's it.
And they
Telegrams,
had to book,
telegrams.
yeah, they had
Yeah,
to book the bands, the hotel
yeah.
rooms, the food. They had to do everything without, and like we're scrambling, and we've got all these gadgets and stuff, and we're scrambling, and they had nothing, and they put it together, and boy did they put it together, yeah.
Well, they did it in such a beautiful way because up to this time, if a band went to a club, uh, and this was, all over the United States. I mean, rock and roll was happening, and the most popular was the Fillmore Auditorium up in San Francisco. But for the most part, and that was a rather large one. But there were also smaller clubs, and the bands would go, and there's a back room where they would maybe rehearse and change their clothes and all that, and there'd be pizza and Coca-Cola. Of course, they brought their own refreshments as well, to motivate them. But for the most part, it was just crummy, awful pizza, and the sound equipment that they would use was always substandard.
Yeah.
And Lou and John knew this, so they provided a chef 24 hours for those 3 days
Wow.
that served filet mignon, New York steak, ribeye, and lobster anytime that those guys wanted it. 24-hour
Man,
on-call chef
that's really
underneath the
great.
stage. Yeah. So are very close to the stage. So these guys are eating very well. And the sound equipment was the best that these bands had ever heard. David Crosby even made a comment. It's in the film. He says, wow, great sound equipment. So you give a band, first of all, you feed them. So they're not going out there starving. They're well fed. They're feeling
well
good for
fed,
now.
yeah.
And then they know they're sounding their absolute best because of the sound equipment. You have the audience out there, and chairs were provided instead of sitting in the dirt or standing, chairs. So the audience is very comfortable. They're listening to this incredible sound. They're feeling very good. They're throwing that energy right back to the band. The band feels it. They're looking around. They feel fantastic. They throw it right back to the audience. So there's this wonderful synergy of going back and forth of this very, very beautiful, happy, loving vibe. It was a very, very innovative, wonderful event, and it was a brainchild of these two guys, and they knew how to do it.
They knew how to do it. And what I was impressed by is the different style of music. You had folk, you had soul with Otis Redding, you had psychedelic. I mean, then you haven't had a guy on a Rabbi Shankner on a sitar. I mean, what? Come on, right now, look at the variety. I mean, unbelievable.
Yeah, Ravi Shankar. He might have been. I'm not sure. He was one of the few artists that got paid. He might have been signed. I think Eric Burden was signed before they actually started. So Eric Burden was paid. He received something, but everybody else played for free because Lou and John set up a foundation. So it was really, I mean, a charitable event. But all these guys wanted to be involved. And another thing, you had mentioned, who did they get and all that, and how did they put it together? Something that was very key was to give it credibility to the artists that they were asking to perform. They said, well, it's not only John and me, it's Paul McCartney, and it's Mick Jagger, Johnny Rivers, who was local, Terry Melcher, who was on the board. They had a board of governors. Terry Melcher was a very successful producer. Somebody that Terry and I met each other when we were in the second grade, because we both grew up in the LA area, and then both ended up living here, and both ended up having kids. Two sons. He had a son. I had a son practically the same age, Ryan Melcher and Dugan O'Neal. Two kids that were in the Cub Scouts together.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
So, and they've both gone on to great things. So he had some really very, very successful people and very well-known people in terms of rock and roll. And unfortunately, the visas were very difficult to maintain. So that's why Jagger couldn't get over here. Brian Jones did make it. But otherwise, if the visas had been granted, the Rolling Stones would have performed, the Beatles would have performed.
Yeah.
John Lennon couldn't get over to the States. So, and then they also had another band booked, the Beach Boys.
Yeah.
But, and they were immensely successful. They were, definitely at the top of their game. And they had an issue. Unfortunately, Brian Wilson was having trouble performing live.
Yeah.
And so he was reticent to be part of the pop festival. I think they wish they had, and I certainly wish they had such an amazing, again, innovative sound. So it could have gone many ways, but it went still very well. The fact that you had some breakout performances with, I would say, with first Otis Redding, just blew the stage apart. Just charisma beyond charisma. Janis performed Ball and Chain twice. She was the only one that performed twice, and there's a reason for that. But I could barely take the pictures. She was so powerful. Her energy, I thought she'd be like a rocket taking off, on the launch pad. Her energy was just amazing. She put every last molecule of breath.
I could see in the crowd, Mama Cass is just like, she's like looking, shaking her head like, I can't believe this lady.
Yeah, Janis was Janis. There's nobody like her ever. And then the biggie, Jimmy.
Yeah.
Burning his guitar. But from the very first chord that he hit, he comes out and he just, and then the bass and drums come in and the stage explodes. And his entire set was just mind-blowing. And he finishes it with setting his guitar on fire. So
I had a conversation with you a while back. You told me when you took a photo of Hendrix, you had one leg on a folding chair, dangling the other leg and ready to fall at any time. Was that?
Yeah. I actually really didn't get the shot I wanted. I had, first of all, I was doing this balancing act because there was a woman very close standing by me, Jill Gibson, beautiful woman, and she was dating Lou Adler at the time, but also an extraordinary photographer. And being a gentleman, when people were trying to get higher, because the stage was 7 feet high. So being up close, you really couldn't see it. So the only way to really get view was to stand on one of the folding chairs. So I had gotten a chair and I look over at her and I just say, here, why don't you take it as well? So we shared it. And she put both feet and was stable, kind of leaning against me. And then I was leaning into the stage on one foot. And I was trying to advance the shutter in the camera and deal with Noel Redding, who is the bass player for Jimmy. His feet were probably 3 feet from me, and they kept going back and forth getting in my way, and I'm trying to dodge around it. And Jimmy's at probably about 15 feet on the other side of the stage, and I really never got the shot of him burning the guitar. I got shots during his performance, and I got some cool shots of him backstage. But Jill ended up getting, the photographer next to me, she got some great shots. And one of those shots that she got ended up on Rolling Stone magazine on the cover. The most famous is Ed Kareff, who was in the center of the stage. And he's the photographer that got the shot of the famous shot of Jimmy on his knees, fanning the flames,
beautiful,
and giving homage to his muse. It was a sacrificial ritual, just performed so flawlessly, like it had been rehearsed many, many times. There were so many things about this moment when Jimmy burned his guitar that it was almost divine intervention. Jimmy apparently had burned his guitar only one time before, and he tried it in I think the Victoria Theatre outside of London, and the Who were playing on the same bill, and Jimmy actually burned his hands just a little bit because he kept trying to with matches trying to light the guitar, and it wouldn't take, and finally it kind of just erupted these high flames and kind of singed a little bit. I think he had to get treated, but in terms of the timing and the presentation and the staging, had it gone like that, where he's sitting there doing this and this, and pretty soon I think the fire marshal would have jumped up on stage and grabbed him, and it would have been a whole different situation. Instead, he takes this little can of Ronson lighter fluid and he just sprinkles it all around and takes one match and goes. I mean, I know when I try to light my barbecue that way with a lighter fluid.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I sit through match after match after. He took one match.
In the meantime, it's all that gas is leaking out while you're getting matches. When you finally do it, it just boom. I've had my eyebrows fried a couple times.
Yeah, I know. So it could have gone. It could have gone anyway, and it stunned everybody. I mean, even the photographer, this wonderful lady next to me, Jill Gibson, she said, you almost couldn't take the picture. It was so amazing what he was doing. Jill Gibson and I kind of connected maybe 5 years ago or so. And I told her, I was able to find her through the internet. And I told her I was standing right next to her. I made a big impression. She had no idea who I was. She didn't remember a thing. But she figured it out that, I was the real deal. And just a real delight. She's an artist living up in the Bay Area. Just a very nice person. She went on to do some really great things. So I'm really glad. It's fun to reconnect with people after all these years. And getting back to Fred, I mean, the fact that through Monterey, we were able to reconnect our relationship, because right after Monterey Pop, I was working at a doctor's office in a photo lab doing more medical photography. And I was going to go to LA now because they wanted me down there. You know, I was looking at jobs. So I had a responsibility to find somebody to replace me. So I put an ad in the paper and Fred shows up. So we're talking. I'm trying to see how much he really knows. And he's a very charismatic guy. He'll let you know everything. And so he got the job, and he ended up, he carried on for me. But there was another thing that happened just before Hendrix came on. The Who, they went first. And that's a whole nother issue. Who is going to follow who? Yeah. The Who went out. That's in the history books of how that was decided. But I was on the side where Peter Townsend was. So at the end of their act, they're going crazy and pushing drums over. And Peter Townsend switches his guitar, and he's literally maybe 7 to 8 feet in front of me. He's up on the stage. And I see him go over and switch this guitar to more like almost a very lightweight, not balsa wood, but it was pretty light. And I went, oh, something's going on here. And sure enough, he takes it, he starts smashing it on the stage. And a chunk flies up and hits me right here in the head, about that big.
Oh, wow.
And, it was such light wood, I barely felt it. So I bend over, I pick it up, and I put it in my pocket. And I'm trying to, that's one of the reasons I never really got the pictures. I got hit in the head. And because there's some great shots of him.
I've seen the photo or the video. Yeah. Yeah.
And another great friend, a good friend of mine, wonderful guy, great photographer, Henry Dills, he was on stage. He got that shot. And Henry and I have talked about that. So anyway, I have this thing. Now we're maybe 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that later on. I'm talking to Fred, and I have this piece of from the guitar, and it was leaning up on the counter in the darkroom. And he goes, "What's that?" I go, "Oh, this? Oh, that's part of Peter Townsend's guitar, from Monterey Pop when he smashed it." And he goes, "Could I have it?" And I go, "What the hell do I want this piece of wood for?" Yeah. Nobody had any idea what Monterey Pop was going to become.
Yeah, nobody had any idea.
This thing, right? Because there was no reference to compare it to, So I go, sure. So I give it to him. I go down to LA. I'm there for the next 7 or 8 years. I have this amazing career doing album covers and shooting bands and then celebrity. It was a pretty cool time in my life.
Yeah, it was great.
I lost touch with Fred. And years later, right around the time when they're doing the 50th anniversary, so we're talking 2017, 50 years later, Fred and I reconnect. And first thing I say, because I always tried to find him. I wanted my guitar piece back. And I said, God, it's so great to see you again, and everything. Remember that chunk of Peter Townsend's guitar that I gave you and everything? And he goes, yeah. And I go, do you still have it? He goes, oh, no, I lost that a long time ago. I don't know. I wanted Anyway.
Yeah. Now, tell us.
We had a lot of fun.
Like what I was saying earlier in this show, that we did an interview with Fred and Tom called Monterey Pop 1. So I recommend the listeners to, this is part 2, to go to Buzzin with Cousin YouTube page and get that video, and it'll blend into the one we're doing right now, or just going to Buzzin with Cousin page and scrolling all the way down to find Monterey Pop 1. So, Tom, tell us about Joplin, but I want to reiterate what you told me a while back, that there was a rivalry between San Francisco bands and Los Angeles bands. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, and as I start that, I'll show you. Here's a fun shot of the two of us there.
Oh, wow, that's really great.
Yeah. So, whoops, that's me. But here's our buddy right there. So he's right here with us, and believe me, he had a wonderful way of telling stories. So
beautiful way of telling a story. Yeah.
The two of us, we would give a talk every once in a while locally, and we always got a big response. So I'm trying to find some shots for the reference. So ask me that question again.
You were saying that, Joplin was Big Brother from San Francisco. Right. And I talked to you before. You said there was a rivalry between Los Angeles, Southern California, and San Francisco.
No, I was gonna talk about Janice there all of a sudden. And no, that's a real good question to ask, because not a lot of people know. But it was basically two tribes that were coming together. And the organic, very earthy, grounded, very loose in some ways music of San Francisco, mainly, that would be definitive, would be the Grateful Dead. There's no band ever like the Grateful Dead, but it had a very granular quality to it. And it was followed up by Quicksilver Messenger Service, Dan Hicks, the Hot Licks, the Great Society, when Grace Slick was the lead singer. It's before she joined the Jefferson Airplane. The Airplane was another band, very similar. They had a very distinctive sound and feeling. Yeah. And you get down to LA, and the bands were more commercial. Shinier, more almost just completely. Well, they wore suits and neckties in the beginning. Yeah. And the guys up in San Francisco, some of them look like draconian people for this time. Right. Some of them could have been in The Hobbit or something, with furs, and their hair was all much longer and everything, and the LA bands were much more clean cut, and their music was more clean cut. It didn't have that. It's a very very kind of thin wire to try and really show the difference. But I mean, the LA bands with Dylan songs, when I say, wow, yeah, they're much more commercial. No, they had a wonderful organic quality too, but it was a little bit more polished than, that's the way I interpreted it. So anyway, they both have different philosophies, and they're coming together. And there was a little bit of an issue like that. And the Grateful Dead, they were the ones that were really making the biggest stink about it. And eventually what happened, they all got together and they realized, you know what? You guys are okay. Yeah, you guys are okay too.
Yeah, great.
So, Jerry Garcia ends up playing on the first Crosby, Stills and Nash album, and a lot of the guys from LA, particularly the CSNNY group and Joni Mitchell, people like that, the LA people moved up into the Bay Area and got houses up there. So this meeting of the two tribes eventually became this blending. Yeah. So that was another thing that happened. Those 3 days of the festival, there was really that wonderful, loving kind of atmosphere. And people just felt good. Simple as that.
Now, Big Brother is San Francisco, and they.
Oh yeah, and that's another band I failed to mention. Yeah, Big Brother was right in there, exactly like that.
San Francisco.
Yeah, they were part of the San Francisco band, and if you saw them, and if you heard, I mean, something like Ball and Chain, you get the musicality of the band, raunchy, real, get down, yeah, That band very, and those guys still perform.
Psychedelic. Wow.
Yeah, they're very psychedelic. Now, there was, I want to say there were the bands in LA. There's another one, Love. They didn't make it up to the Doors. They didn't make it either. They some of these things were just odd that they didn't fall into that. But Buffalo Springfield, they were there, and of course, David Crosby ended up playing in the set that the Buffalo Springfield had, and that caused a little bit of a rift between the Byrds and Crosby. And so there's all kinds of stuff that happened during those 3 days that people really don't realize. But backstage, there was a lot of mixing and getting together and how are you, and let's jam together, and people connected.
How was the experience with Joplin when the Big Brother came on? Or you guys are in awe, right?
More than awe, yeah.
What the hell is going on?
Here's the thing. It's something that people don't realize, but D.A. Pennebaker, who is a documentary filmmaker, he was making this film for John Phillips and for Lou Adler. And it was going to be for television, of all things, for ABC television. So there were signs all over the fairgrounds saying, by entering the fairgrounds, you give permission to be filmed. So they had basically the releases of everybody. And that television, that film was going to be something like Monday Night at the Movies. And Lou and John had made this deal with Barry Diller, who was in charge of programming there at ABC. Another guy I went to school with, by the way, in Beverly Hills. He's now, a gazillionaire, very successful. But they made this deal, and they were going to make it into more of a TV movie. So they got money from ABC, I think $150,000, which really went on to putting into the production of the Pop Festival. And they had to not only first of all, I'll go back. So the crowds, they already did their, by seeing that, knowing that as they were entering, that they gave their rights to their images, and they could be in the movie, and they couldn't possibly want any money for it. Now it's different with the bands performing. The bands had to give permission to be filmed.
Yeah.
And the Grateful Dead, in the beginning, they were, hey, we don't know about this thing. We're putting the brakes on. And Janice, or put it this way, the manager for Big Brother said, no, I don't want to be. We don't want to be in this film. a Monday night at the movies or something on ABC television. No, we don't want to be part of it.
No.
So Janice performed, and it just destroyed the place. I mean, both performances were practically exactly the same. Not one wasn't better than the other. They were just amazing. And so she performs, and she finds out, that everybody's going along that they want to be in this film. So she fires her manager and hires, it'll come to me in a minute. She hires a new manager who signs off on the movie and says, yeah, Janice and Big Brother, they want to be in the film. Okay, so they say, well, then we got to shoot her again. So that's why Janice performed twice.
Well, that's why she came on twice.
Yeah, wow. Because she wanted to be in the film, and originally her former manager wasn't going to allow it. So and if you've ever seen Monterey Pop, you'll notice that the Grateful Dead are not in it. And
yeah,
that was a shame. That was a shame.
Yeah. That is, yeah.
Their manager Rock Scully grew up on the peninsula. Wonderful guy, and
oh yeah, nice guy.
Yeah, terrific guy. He is unfortunately passed away, but he, he made a bad choice in not advising the band to be in it. But they believe me, they had this attitude. They were anti Lou Adler, anti-John, anti-LA.
Yeah.
Anti. So, and anti-film. I mean, anti-television. So, here's another little caveat. So, the Pop Festival's over, and D.A. Pennybacker, takes all the footage, and he looks at everything. It takes a while to review it. And he comes back to Lou and John, and he says, you can't put this on television. It won't do justice. This is a movie. This is so good that you have a film here that could be in movie theaters all over the world, not one night on television.
Yeah.
So,
right.
So, Lou and John, they hear this and they agree with him, and they say, well, we got a problem. ABC really owns the rights because they had put up the money. Actually, I think that $150,000 was for the film as well, more than just the regular production, but it was for the film production. So they go back and they see the president of ABC Records, this good old boy from Texas, can't think of his name right now, fundamental Christian, just good old boy, solid Christian values and everything. And they bring a tape to show, give an idea of what the Pop Festival was like. Well, what they bring is when a clip of when Jimi Hendrix goes up to the amps just before he starts to throw his guitar out and set it on fire. He goes up to the amps and he starts doing all this crazy feedback and these gyrations of his hips back and forth, undulating, simulating an act of rather intimate terms that people wouldn't, that's suggestive of something that really shouldn't be shown, certainly not on television.
Right.
And they show it to the the president of ABC, and he sees that and he walks over to the machine, he pulls the tape out and he says, not on my network. You can take this thing and keep the money. Get out of here. I'm paraphrasing it, but that's directly from Lou Adler. That's what happened. So they got the rights to the film and they got to keep the money. So there's another amazing thing.
So many things.
Monterey Pop.
There's we've already talked for almost 50 minutes and we haven't really scratched the surface. We also had another show a year ago. We talked for like a little over an hour. I mean, we could go on for, another 2 hours. It's such fascinating to hear, the whole story. So, Tom, I want to show the listeners that really great album cover that you did. And here it is. Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Deja Vu.
Yeah. In the book, when I come to that part, I talk about the way it was. Let's see. You see it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I took that with an antique camera, and from the Civil War era. So, and the image required a very long exposure. So they're being very, very, very still. And they're looking at this big boxy camera. It didn't even have a shutter on it. And I had two cameras set up, two 35 millimeter cameras set up on each side of this big boxy thing, just to back up in case something didn't go right in the processing. Because it was a very old technique called tintype, ferrotype.
Yeah.
And it was very popular during the Civil War era and the late 1800s. But I had to learn how to make one, and I had set up a makeshift darkroom in the house there that Crosby had in the bathroom. So I would take the shot, and then I'd go process it, and then I'd come out and I'd take another one. Well, while I was making this long exposure, I was bracketing. I would take exposures with both of the 35 millimeter cameras on each side. So really, what you see here. People say, well, if it's a long exposure, how did you get the dog? Well, the actual negative that I used was from one of the 35 millimeter cameras.
Beautiful.
So it was just at 125th of a second. The dog walked in, looked, and then walked out. But the dog looked right at
Perfect. Yeah.
the box camera. The dog didn't look at me, because then the dog would have looked off camera. It was looking right where the band was looking, and the dog stopped right in the center. It was amazing. I didn't even realize it at the time, because I went ahead and I processed and I presented the art director, Gary Burden, these tintype images, but they didn't provide enough contrast for reproduction. So that's when he said, we got to go to the backup rolls that you did, the 35. And that's the image that we got from that. And
beautiful. That is really
good. So the whole idea was to come up with this antique vintage look. So I went back to the history books of photography, and I found a technique that was earlier than the tintype, 1845, by a photographer named Fox Talbot. It was called the Sunprit. And so I was able to make a master negative from my original negative, and I made a contact print on poster board that where I had coated it with this special salty silver halide emulsion that I made from my own chemicals, and took it outside of my place in Santa Monica and held it up to the sun, and I watched the image come true, and that's how I made it.
wow,
So
that's really great.
it was originally a mistake, but I never let it get a mistake. I never said, "Oh, I screwed up." I just said,
No.
"Well, that didn't work. Let's see if we can do something else." There's always an alternative. And I found an alternative, and it turned out to be better. That's the way sometimes. So that's another thing that, sometimes mistakes lead to something even better.
Yeah, that's it. Beautiful, Tom. Tom, so the listeners out there, if they want to get iconic photos of Monterey Pop, I know you have a couple of books. Can they contact you and get something, or?
Yeah, they can go to the website. First of all, it's TGO photo. Excuse me. Yes, I'm sorry. That's my email. No, tgophoto.com.
Okay.
Is the tgophoto.com. TGO, my initials. You can email me at tgophoto@gmail.com.
Okay.
tgophoto@gmail.com. And if you just even Google Tom Gundelfinger O'Neal, all that information comes up.
Or they could contact me and I'll contact you.
Better yet,
I'd
love to hear from people. It'd be great.
We'll figure it out.
I sell the book for $30. It's well worth it. A lot of people.
And it's a collector. And I mean, you can't. Those books, when they're gone, you won't be able to get them, because I know some people that have searched. They're going, I can't find them.
They're hard to find. And then, by the way, that's the way That was me then. So
Wow, great.
that's me now. Oh yeah.
All
You know
right.
me now. So yeah, that's crazy stuff, huh? Anyway, we're
So
good.
anyway, Tom, I really appreciate you coming on and today and really sharing this beautiful story of Monterey Pop Festival. And don't be surprised if you come back on a third time because
Yeah, I'll come back. There's still more.
this is this is really great. So I would like to I'm gonna pay a little show a picture of of our good buddy there, Fred Arellano. He's a good man, and Fred, this show is dedicated to you. Thank you, Fred.